Well, before we get to our first caller, our guy Ryan Grubb had his first press conference as the Alabama offensive coordinator. And in one of the topics he talked about, he was asked about like his take about the quarterback race. And he made a comparison to Keelan Russell being a little bit more like Michael Penix Jr. That's a pretty cool comparison right there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that is a positive comparison because Penix was very good. And also when you look at the fact that Ryan Grubb was, his coordinator, and that's when he had his most success in college. That if he is comparing, Russell to him, that you would think that he maybe has a great chance to start, or that he's stylistically the type quarterback that will fit the system that they're wanting to run way better than Milroe, like we've talked about at length this past season. So I think it is a positive sign. The only thing is, though, is that you could also look at it, him putting that comparison out there, it puts more pressure on Keelan Russell to succeed. I mean, that is true. I also think that, stuff like that can be a bit overblown because, like, if you're a competitor, as an athlete, you're going to want to, overperform, expectations. He's already a highly rated recruit. He knows what's at stake at Alabama. Like, if you don't get the job done, you're going to get benched. Like, fans are going to be upset, whether that's right or wrong. That's just the way that it is. You saw fans turn on Milroe this past season because they didn't do that well, even though I don't think it was all his fault. But I think it's a positive thing on that comparison. But definitely, he's got a lot to live up to with that comparison.
Well, and it's funny though, like he brings up about how being at Alabama was the third time being a charm. Because it was like the first time in February 2023, Nick Saban offered him the offensive coordinator position. And it's funny though, I compared it to kind of like Jeff Brom. When Brom was offered a spot in Saban's staff for 2007, he turned that down. Same thing with Ryan Grubb. He had a chance to be on Saban's staff 2023, turned that down. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to stay with my guys, Roma Dunze and Michael Penix and all those guys at Washington for another year. And we're going to see what we can make 2023 for Seattle. And then 2024, the retirement happened. Ryan Grubb back in Tuscaloosa. He's going to be the right hand man of Kalen DeBoer yet again.
I will say though, I think this is a big season for him because when you look at the fact that Ryan Grubb had the success that he did at Fresno State and Washington with Kalen DeBoer, and then he goes off to the NFL, and I wouldn't say he got fully blamed for some of Seattle's shortcomings, but he ended up basically getting let go, right? So now he's back in college, and he's at the biggest school that he's ever been at when it comes to expectations as an offensive coordinator. If he does not live up to expectations or, produce the type stats that he had with his team at Washington, his offense at Washington rather, then Ryan Grubb's going to catch a lot of flack. And I do think it's going to definitely hurt the trajectory of his career as a coach. So this is a big year for him. He definitely has to live up to expectations too, not just Keelan Russell. I mean, obviously, I think if Keelan Russell is the starter and he has a lot of growing pains, that's no one's going to lay that on Grubb. But Grubb has to have this offense be good, be dynamic, a lot better than it was this past season. So I think there is a lot of pressure on Grubb to succeed as well.
Yeah, I mean, like Grubb will have to have a really successful season for 2025, but I'll be honest, I think he's gonna be okay. Like, because I mean, like, if he doesn't have a good season as offensive coordinator for 2025, then there's gonna be issues, right? But if he does have a really good season, which again, I believe he can, then there's gonna be a lot of teams calling for him to be their Nets head coach. There's gonna be some smaller Power Four schools or some AAC Sunbelt schools calling him up saying, "Hey, we want you to be our Nets head coach." There's going to be those schools wanting to call up Ryan Grubb.
The only issue is though is just say that happens, where he has a great year, and then another team, smaller team, wants him to be their head coach. With Nick Saban, we got accustomed to that. We got used to losing coordinators every year. I mean, it's just the way, it's the name of the game. Like, if you got good coordinators and they're putting up good stats with the players you got, they're going to get poached. It's just the way it is. But Nick Saban, almost every single time, got the next hire right. So when you look at Kalen DeBoer's career as a head coach at the Power 4 level, or even the mid, not the mid-major as college basketball, but like the Group of 5 level, he had his success with Grubb. This past season with Sheridan at offensive coordinator for Alabama was not good. So can Kalen DeBoer replace Grubb if they lose him again? Or, for DeBoer, lose him again, but in case of Alabama, lose him for the first time or probably the only time. I'm just saying that I think that's something to watch. I think the two biggest questions is whether Ryan Grubb lives up to the expectations that have been set for him based on what he's done previously as a coordinator. And if he does live up to those expectations and Bama loses them, can Kalen DeBoer replace him and get somebody else that's really good? Because the only other time we've seen him with an offensive coordinator, at the Power 4 level, it didn't go very well. So I'm not super confident that he'll be able to replace that guy. I think him and Grubb have a good tandem, but can he find someone else that's just as good once they lose Grubb? Because they will lose him one way or another eventually. Whether he does good, he'll go to another team, whether it's the NFL again or become a head coach, or if he does bad, they'll have to fire him because that's just the way it is at Alabama.
Well, he was asked about like what to expect on play calling in that press conference, and he said, "We're going to be aggressive. We want guys to be aggressive when it works the best." And the understanding that the players have that we got to be responsible with the football, not go backwards. Make sure that we're always matriculating the ball down the field.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, don't want to be passive. Teams that play slow in college basketball and teams that play slow in college football, I mean, they can win games, but it doesn't always work. You have to have like the perfect team, especially in college football. Like, you have to have a really good team to play slow, and it's almost impossible. Because if you're playing faster, especially if you're going up against a good defense, then you can sometimes catch them off guard, right? But if you're like not playing what like hurry up offense, where huddle, you don't do that. Where you're just like you're using the whole play clock or whatever, and you're snapping it with like 1 second or whatever. Then you see the defense for the other team just jump off the line. And because they know when you're going to snap it, like you have to mix up your tempo. Sometimes go fast, sometimes go slow. I mean, because there were a lot of moments this past season with Alabama where I did not feel that Kalen DeBoer managed the clock well. There were moments where, like I'm liking the fact that they're, having this tempo, but then Alabama would be winning, and then they would just continue to play that way. Like they could have run the ball. They could have, run out the clock, won the game, but like they almost lost to a couple of teams because of that. Because they didn't manage the clock well. I didn't really like the clock management. So yeah, I'm fine with the tempo and all that, wanting to play fast, but you have to vary it. You have to know when to be fast and when not to be. It's not a one size fits all on whether to go fast or slow. You have to mix it up.
That's true, man. That is true. And he's pretty impressed with Austin Mack. I mean, he even brought it so in the press conference, and he's still kind of waiting and seeing on Ty Simpson, but it's gonna be fine. I
Ty
think
Simpson's most likely not going to be the guy if Grubb is giving that many praises to Keelan Russell. Coaches tend to most of the time give away who it's going to be, with their words. And I think Ty Simpson will eventually transfer unless he's content to be a backup at Bama, which some people might be content at that. But If he wants any shot to do anything with his football career, he's going to have to leave if he doesn't start.
True.
But I don't think he's going to start. But definitely going to be interesting. I'm excited to see what Grubb does. Definitely think more than likely that he will do really well, but definitely has high expectations set for him.
True. And before we get to our first caller, I decided to, be generous tonight and,
Jackson
give
giving away
the,
presents.
it's like, hey, I mean, I'm no Mr. Beast, but I'll do my best to be. And I want to give a congratulations to Sean Garner because he is now our 7th member of Alabama at the Voice of College Football. Man, you're going to get some kickbacks on the Alabama channel, Sean. Congrats. And we have our first caller of the night. You know him, you love him on Twitter, on TikTok, the one and only Alabama Richie.
Hey, how are you guys tonight?
Oh, we're
Doing
doing
pretty good.
great. How you
Appreciate you
doing
for
tonight?
calling.
Yes,
How you doing
sir.
tonight, good buddy?
Hey, not too bad. Was gonna say that I like what y'all said about Grubb. I think he's one of the better hires in this DeBoer era that most people would expect. And being with Kalen most of the time, at Indiana, Washington, Fresno State. He knows what he's doing. I thought it was, at first, I was thinking it was one of those, I threw my guy a life raft because he didn't have a job. He was kind of, hungry for something. And then he said, I think we can do something now. I'm sad a little bit for Sheridan, but sometimes the relationships don't really pan out. And I think Sheridan was just a guy where he felt that he threw him in there and was like, well, if it doesn't work out with Seattle, maybe my guy will start thinking about wanting to come back. And one of the things that Saban always said, and this is something that I know I learned a long time ago. So everybody knows Will Muschamp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Muschamp got the job at Florida after not after LSU, but a little bit later. Um, After Urban Meyer, and it doesn't pan out there. He gets the job over at South Carolina. He does just okay, but not enough. And then they hire Shane Beamer. Saban praised a guy like him as a great coordinator because when he was, to me, when he was a coordinator, he was one of the better defensive minds. He had some of the best defense. I thought he did a great job at Georgia during the championship run. I think this is an instance where Grubb and DeBoer are going to match up pretty well because they have this team chemistry together where they believe that if they can get everything together and learn something, I think it'll be one of the better hires. And I still think it is in Kalen's deal at Bama. And you're right. If he has a bad season, then it's not going to help his case out for another job somewhere. Because if you look at a guy like him, right, we have such a high standard at Bama to where if you fail, then everyone's going to look at you as what went wrong. Who do you blame? Is Kalen the guy? Was Grubb the right fit? Is it because the SEC so stacked? Was it because the Pac-12 was mediocre to some degree? They helped out a guy, and I think that the board can figure it out with Grubb, and I think it's a marked improvement. But it's going to be interesting to see these guys come together, and especially with Keelan Russell, because there's another guy that I was going to bring up. He's from Houston, Texas, and this guy is another five-star quarterback that's supposed to come out of the 2026 class. He hasn't signed any paperwork yet, no dotted line or anything, but he's the next guy if Keelan doesn't do that well or, they go a different direction. So you got to be, to me, I hope that, Grubb does a good job and the Penix comparisons stand out because I've always said that if you can take a guy that has high expectations, make him a good quarterback, then it just not only makes you set up for your future in the NFL, but it makes your the team happy and it makes the culture gel together. And again, um, I think you'll see in those throwaway games Ty Simpson a little bit just to see
Mhm.
what you can get. And you'll probably see a little bit of Mac maybe because of what he's done to like chip in. But they're really looking to lean towards Keelan Russell. They don't want to be known for losing another five-star quarterback because with this NIL deal, I'm just scared that if he has a good season or something, he could leave because I said the same thing about Lenora Sellers at South Carolina, right? After they lost to us, they went like almost, if I'm not mistaken, undefeated, except for the bowl game. So again, I think that, guy like that will be a hot commodity if he has a good season, Keelan. And I just hope that he wants to stay playing for us, and we'll see what happens.